Welcome to the Government IT Podcast from Converge One Government Solutions, featuring expert discussions around cloud solutions, cybersecurity, modern workplace, enterprise networking, and customer experience for government and civil agencies. And now, here are your hosts, Ryan Heath and Julian Foster.
Well, thanks to everyone for joining us today. We're glad to have you here on our webinar regarding TDM migrations, and we're joined by Jim Westdorp from Ciena, Brian Summer and Ryan Heath from Converge One Government Solutions. And we've got a lot of media info in store for you guys on this subject. So Ryan, I'll let you go ahead and take over and get into the conversation.
Thanks, Julian. So first off, kind of want to set the baseline of, the customers that we have on the Converge One Government Solutions side really consist of very large enterprises, campuses, multiple data centers. Majority of them are supporting 10,000 to 20,000 end users. So they can be large military bases, civil agencies, or even a large enterprise. We still have a lot of legacy TDM, Sonnet, HDH technologies kind of running in the core of those, especially on the base side. So, what advantages do customers see when migrating from a legacy backbone to a packet networking solution? So Jim, can you kind of go through that piece for us?
Yeah, sure, Ryan, be happy to. Jim Westdorp here. I'm the technologist for Ciena Government Solutions, and particularly in the DoD and government space, we see quite a bit of applications where there's existing TDM, time division multiplexing, so older protocols that are in the network for very good reason, but where the network needs to be updated and modernized. And the challenges with TDM in particular are that because it's older, it's difficult to manage. There's a lot of in many cases there are multiple networks that need to be converged, and it's still fairly difficult to support as a result of that, because there's a number of things that are discontinued. There are not that many people who understand how to use it anymore. And in terms of your basic question about packet networking advantages, there really are several. First and foremost is that there's substantially better performance in modern networks. The older TDM networks, Sonnet, SDH, which were state of the art in the 90s, those were hundreds of megabits to maybe a couple, 2.4, 2.5 gigabits per second. And really in mainline core and even metro networks now, base rate is 10 gig and moving to 100 gig. Modern core networks are now pushing 400 and will soon to be over a terabit. So considerably enhanced and much better performance is available today than what was available in the earlier days. And that gives you much more capacity to grow. It gives you the ability to support future missions and future applications. And because of the flexibility of the modern networks and the modern network management systems, along with the greater capacity, you get better user satisfaction. And you actually with the modern packet-based networks, you can carry both TDM and packet services together. So you can consolidate your networks onto single network infrastructure and do all of that with reduced total cost of ownership and better OpEx.
And we've deployed a lot of these solution sets. So Brian, I know you've worked with customers directly for many years regarding this. Can you kind of respond with a little bit of the advantages and the post migrations? What are the outcomes that you've seen so far with these migrations that we've put in place?
And building on what was just said, the biggest thing is we have many disparate networks on every base that I've been to, different management platforms, different capabilities, different uptimes, reliability. So we can consolidate a lot of these disparate networks. We can efficiently manage network traffic. And one of the bigger things that we run into is enhanced security and analytics. By using the Manage, Control, and Plan platform from Ciena, we can see and monitor network traffic. We can control the network. We can commission devices. We can fulfill services. We are able to do service assurance, and we can monitor network utilization and move things around as we need to. With that single unified interface, operational networks can be completed quickly. As a graphical user interface, the users are able to, in a day, set up services that used to take weeks at a time. And one of the big things we're finding out, fiber outside plant resources on basically every site I've ever been to are maxed out. Whenever we do put in a solution like this, we are freeing up a lot of those resources that they can use for other things. So after we get the system in, we're doing all that, we can drop and add circuits, we can groom the network, we can do that quickly and with ease. A lot of our networks that we're carrying are C2, command and control. Those networks have to stay up. With this particular solution set, it has a very, very robust failover capability. And what we do is we set every one of our C2 networks and many of our just standard TDM networks with that failover capability with these systems. And one of the big things, another big thing that comes up, anytime we put a network on, we have to have an authority to operate. The systems that we're putting in from Ciena have an approved configuration with an authority to operate up front. And we install the system, they meet all the DISA-STIG requirements. It's a very secure system when we're finished. And because the network is so efficient, robust, responsive, and adaptable, the end users have to focus on their mission. They don't have to worry about ever-changing underlying transport network challenges. It makes their job much easier. Okay, Ryan?
Appreciate that. And so now I couldn't kind of figure out, what are the migration challenges that our customers face when we go from legacy to packet-based technology? What kind of things we need to overcome? What kind of things have we seen on the projects? So Jim, I'm going to throw that question over to you.
Yeah, sure. Let me just cover a few things at a high level, and then I'll let Brian talk to some of the more specifics that he's seen in the field. But some of the biggest challenges associated with the migration. I mean, there's budget and things like that, but probably the most important thing is to understand the as-is network, particularly for the TDM portion of it, because in many cases that can be complicated in terms of the various multiplexing strategies that are used to aggregate the really low-speed traffic that really is occurring in many of the TDM networks. So you really want to understand what's there so that you can make a plan for how to migrate the various pieces of that and the various services over your packet-based networks. And as part of that, actually, one of the key benefits of this kind of migration strategy is that you do have the ability to keep both your TDM services and your future Ethernet services. So one of the key things is determining which things can actually be converted directly to Ethernet and which things actually need to stay at TDM because they're supported by perhaps legacy equipment that has a very important mission, or some older gear that can't be replaced and still has to run on the TDM technologies. But there are going to be things that can be converted to Ethernet. And of course, with a modern network, you'll be able to run Ethernet services directly. So you want to make those kinds of decisions. And then from an overall strategy perspective, how do you want to see your network evolve? Do you want to do what's called cap and grow, where you basically stop doing incremental capacity adds to your existing network and then grow in a separate network? Or do you want to migrate your existing network traffic to a completely new network and then upgrade? And then what form of in-service or out-of-service upgrade do you want? So, depending on what your end state network is going to be, there's a couple of different strategies that can be used. I would say that, the biggest takeaway in terms of the challenge, if you will, is that there's a number of different options. There's not one size fits all. And probably even more importantly, from a planning perspective, you don't have to do everything at once. You really can do a migration, do the important parts first, and then space it out over time, really, to make it a tractable problem. Right?
Yeah, that's pretty good. I really like having the multiple strategies to go into it, so it's not just a hard way of doing it. Whatever the customer kind of needs and what the outcomes need to be, we can be accepted to that and roll into a strategy that meets that. Brian, what are the challenges we faced on the customer side going through these migrations as we've gone through a bunch of these large cycles to completion and outcomes? What kind of things have we learned to go over the process to make it a little bit smoother across the board for the migration and implementation?
Yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about the challenges they face up front. They have network congestion, and they can't expand bandwidth. The mission is growing all the time. Requirements for additional bandwidth, additional circuits occur almost daily. All the networks that they have today are failure prone and suffer from a lack of redundancy. That affects mission effectiveness and negatively affects posture for the sites to be able to perform their mission. One of the big things that we have is identifying every single service that that is being provided by in-place networks, and determining whether they're at the end of their life cycle and unsupportable. In many cases, users have become accustomed to a less than stellar network performance on their existing networks. And we have to shake the trees to identify all the services they are supporting today. On every single project we have worked and are working now, from large program office network requirements to just simple add and drop circuits across the base, customers find issues that they were never aware of. One of the things that Jim said before was, which services do we migrate in an as-is state, stay TDM, or which can be migrated to an Ethernet-supported service? Establishing and understanding just which services are able to be changed, perhaps changing endpoints and moving to an Ethernet packet-based transport helps with the overall migration efforts. There are some things that definitely have to stay TDM, and we keep those. But if we can help them migrate not only their network, but the endpoints as well, it's very helpful. And one of the big things that the users worry about when we first get to a site is, how are we going to support this new system? We need training, we need logistic support. So we give rigorous training, and we participate with site personnel during the initial migration with professional services. We have them watch us over the shoulder as we implement the system and set up their initial circuits. And that is all done turnkey. And what happens then is the sites become quite adept at migrating remaining services. They can identify solutions for new system requirements quite easily. Okay, Ryan?
I'd like to kind of go through maybe some high-level migration processes and kind of the common gotchas that we've gone through. So, Jim, do you have a couple slides that we can look through to walk us through that migration strategy?
Yeah, sure. Let me walk you through a couple bits of the process and discuss what some of the steps are at a high level, and then Brian can talk through some specific examples for us. But from an overall process perspective, when you're thinking about evolving TDM services, one of the first things that you discover as you talk to the customers is that, of course, a number of them, almost all of them, see it as a priority because they've got substantial amounts of TDM in their network. And one of the other things is that almost all of them realize that because of some of the complexities and, just because of the overall process, they're all going to need help in some fashion. That's where Ciena and Converge One come in and are able to help the customers work through in a guided fashion the overall process and how to deal with some of the issues in terms of budgeting and technology and expertise. We can bring that to the table and really help make the migrations go smoothly. In terms of an overall blueprint, these are kind of the steps that we see. As I talked about earlier, first and foremost is to set the overall strategy in terms of where you want to get to. And then once you understand where you want to get to in terms of what kind of capacities you need and what kind of overall services that you want, and whether it's going to be in service or out of service or cap and grow, or the various overall evolution strategies that I talked about. You want to set that up first. Then there's an evaluation phase that happens where you're basically now looking at the current state of the network, where you want to go, and what individual steps you want to take. We go through a planning process. And once that's done, of course, the execution process, and typically that goes through a number of different phases. And finally, we, of course, close out, do any upgrades to the OSS and BSS software, decommission any old gear that's no longer being used, pull it out of the network, and then enablement, which is training, et cetera. So about a 5-6-step process that we go through. And when we do that, what we see is probably the most important part of the process is the planning that gets done up front. When you do the appropriate strategic planning and avoid jumping straight into implementation, which some customers want to do, but if you really do the planning piece up front, we found that pretty much every dollar spent on planning can save you 3 to 5x in execution costs and substantial amounts of money in CapEx, because you're not buying equipment maybe that you didn't need or buying, heaven forbid, buy the wrong equipment. So that's probably the most important part of the overall multi-step process that we go through. Brian, you want to talk about some specific examples that you've seen?
Yeah, and then the planning piece up front is very, very important. We've run into that where customers do want to just hurry up and start installing. And we find that, if you take the time up front and plan for it, you don't miss as many things. So what we do is, after we've done that initial planning and engineering, we collaborate directly with the customer on a weekly basis to identify issues. With Ciena, our customers and us, it allows us to identify problems early and plan for resolution before they manifest themselves while we're implementing the system. During our efforts with many of the military departments, we come across degraded fiber between node locations. With fiber characterization, we're able to identify all that, alleviate that problem, and in many cases, we have to do repair actions with the government to fix that. We find that doing that early in the process alleviates a lot of problems on the migration. Rack space, HVAC, power are all things that we have to plan for. If we look at that up front, we run into many fewer problems. A lot of times what we'll find is they believe that they have rack space and sufficient power. We get there and find out, well, they don't. So we have to fix that. It helps quite a bit to have Ciena and C1GS engineers involved from the beginning. Another issue that we had on a number of our systems is network timing and synchronization for TDM endpoints. Customers overlooked that. Their timing solution that they had was either via an old legacy system, or they just didn't worry about timing that much. What we've learned is we address that now during the proposal phase. And in most cases, we find that the customer has sufficient existing equipment for timing that we can leverage, but sometimes we find out that they don't. So we have solutions available that we implement now to address that and keep that in the noise area. That way it doesn't rise up to be a problem when we're ready to implement the system and start providing services. Another thing we find out is during network consolidation, we find many other services that are candidates for migration. The customer a lot of times doesn't realize that he has a lot of circuits and or services out there that they can support with a new network. When we identify these, we work with the customer to implement them or provide sufficient equipment resources to support them for future actions that the customer can do themselves.
Yeah, through this process, I've seen these projects, they do take a little bit of time to go from kind of the ideation phase, the sell phase, all the way to completion with the outcomes. And during that process, ordering equipment takes a while, getting all that kind of prepped. So the heavy end lifting and discussion part up front, is definitely key for a successful outcome. So there's a lot of work to do, especially when you're talking about HVAC, power requirements, things of that nature, when you're kind of bringing in to do a redo and make sure that you have everything that you need for a successful outcome when you actually do the cutovers. So there's a lot of work to do in these types of projects. So I think, being very heavy up front with discussions and going through that on a weekly basis is definitely key for a successful implementation. Another question I kind of have is, how does Ciena provide the versatile transition from legacy to TDM to the modern packet solution? Can we kind of go into some details regarding that?
Yeah, sure, Ryan. Happy to give you a few nuggets on some of the actual equipment. So, Ciena as a packet equipment service provider has a number of different solutions, a number of different products that fit into this solution space. And so let me talk through a couple of those. We really have different solutions depending on the overall scale of the problem. So first we have a set of what are called pluggable. So we have a number of smaller products which are used to provision packet equipment. And those are first and foremost, Ethernet packet-based products. But on each of their ports, you can decide whether it's going to be an Ethernet service or a TDM service. So we can take our regular products, which are used for implementing packet services, and on a port-for-port basis, decide which of those ports are going to be TDM and which of them are going to be Ethernet. And so for a situation where there's just a small handful of TDM services that need to be preserved, that's a very good way to do that. Secondly, if we have somewhat more TDM circuits, maybe 10, 20, 30 of them, we have what we call a modular metro scale solution. It's a product called a 3926. And that one allows you to do a mixture of TDM and Ethernet. And one side of it is dedicated for Ethernet and the other side is dedicated for TDM, up to 16 services. And then if you have a very large base or a very large installation which has potentially hundreds of TDM circuits and maybe you need to interoperate with some legacy gear, we have something called the 6500 in the Packet Transport System, or PTS, which can be used to support large amounts of traffic. And you can see on the right-hand side, basically what we'll do is we'll take the TDM circuits, whether there's a small number or a large number, and we're going to aggregate those up either to a GigE or a 10 GigE at the edge, or if necessary, we can go all the way up to 100 GigE. So we can capture tremendous amounts of data, carry it across an Ethernet core, and then distribute it to the other side in either Ethernet form or TDM form, depending on the needs for the service that's being delivered. So scale, automation, because you're using a modern TDM network, and flexibility is really what our overall solutions are about. And just to give you an idea of some of the specifics, I'll go through this quickly. But the plugs support DS1 through OC3. And like I said, those can be used on a port-for-port basis. The 3926 is a very small form factor 1 rack unit that has different plug-in capabilities. You can use the plugs for that, but there's also modules that support 10, 12, in this case 16 T1E1s. So actually, you can do OC3 up to OC48 in this one as well. So the next set of scale. And then, if you go for PTS, which is the bigger system, this is a chassis-based system, and you can see, hundreds or potentially even thousands of the very low-speed DS1E1s. So from a hardware perspective, we offer solutions that'll take you everything from just a handful of T1E1s all the way up to hundreds or thousands of those, and all the way up to OC48 or OC192. Pretty much covers the whole gamut. And then, through this overall discovery process that we talked about in the beginning, between Ciena and Converge One, we can decide which of the equipment sets is the best one to use for your particular application.
Thank you for all that good information. And, Brian, can you kind of expand on some of those legacy services and migrating the packets and the items that are kind of coexist for the migrations?
Yeah, well, one of the things that happen is during our discovery phase, we identify a lot of services which must remain TDM. There's things that we just can't change over, and then we find out which ones we can evolve to a packet construct. Some of those are telemetry, requiring high bandwidth TDM. That's for space applications, test ranges, simulators. Interesting thing is simulators. Latency is a big problem with simulators. Say you have a simulator one side of the country and another one on the other side of the country, and you're practicing refueling exercises. When I move the joystick for my refueling boom on one end, I can't wait for it to react to the other end, or I'll run into the other plane. So latency is a big thing that we have to address, and simulators is one of the things that we absolutely support with these systems. Another thing is existing telephony, existing supported networks. Those are all things that we migrate and we keep pretty much in an as-is TDM construct if possible. We try to take traditional IP and MPLS network services and transport them, and we put that in addition to Ethernet over the OTN network. And the interesting thing is post-migration, because of the way Ciena's system can handle TDM and packet, as he said, on the same box, they can exist in a hybrid fashion, or they can be fully migrated to packet services when the endpoint systems can be upgraded to packet-based interfaces. We find that most of our locations end up in a hybrid fashion when we're done, and it's going to take them several years to migrate everything off of TDM, and we provide them the capability to do that.
So it sounds like it gives them a lot of growth and ability to be agile on future actions. So let's really discuss the advantages of moving to a packet network. What additional services can we support, now, and what are we looking to in the future?
So at a high level, again, when we talk about moving to a modernized packet-based network while still supporting the required TDM services, what we're really getting are a couple of key things. Of course, we talked about some of the, affordability and scale, but you're really getting reliability as well. You're getting, continuity of service, better disaster recovery, and actually a significant amount of incremental flexibility than you had before. Plus, because packet-based networks are pretty much the basis of all modern networks, there's a very, very rich tool set that's available to monitor the state of your network, and the network itself now is much more amenable to automation and software-defined networking. And in terms of additional services, actually, if you think of almost any use for the wide area network for internet today, video, real-time controls, high-speed email, and conferencing, and sensor data distribution, all of these things are pretty much part of modern networks, and those are things that you can support once you've modernized your network to support the Ethernet capabilities that you would have had a very, very difficult time doing had you stayed in the TDM service land, if you will, which really stopped evolving 20 years ago. Brian, can you talk to some of the specific services that you've seen customers realize?
Yeah, certainly can. We've implemented and migrated services for a number of requirements, including the ones you mentioned. We have to have real-time services for launches and mission-critical communications. Real-time video streaming is one of the ones that we've implemented at a number of locations. We have to have telemetry for launches and or mission support. They have to have the data as instantaneously as possible. Another interesting thing that we've done that we weren't able to do is Backhaul of Scale. That's an electrical grid control system. That has to happen in real time. We have microseconds from a fault on an electrical circuit and a very large substation, and it has to shut that fault to ground so it doesn't injure people or cause problems throughout the base. We backhaul all of that with Ciena products, and we just started doing that. Data and Ethernet services, we can do wireline Ethernet at layer 1 and layer 2 now, and that eliminates latency and network issues that traditionally we have been supporting throughout DoD with layer 3 enabled networks, NIPRNet and SIPRNet, for example. If you look at a typical base, it's mostly routed at layer 3, and they extend that by using this transport system that we put in with Ciena. We can do everything at layer 1 and 2, and we eliminate latency, and jitter goes away, believe it or not, and it helps. Another critical services that we've been providing is for intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance weapon and mission systems. And we've been doing that across the DoD. Won't get into where those are, but they are ubiquitous, and we are supporting them. And then coming very soon, one of the things that the Air Force in particular and a lot of the DoD MILDEPs are doing is commercial solutions for classified. One of the things we have is bulk encryptors. We have bulk encryptors on either end of a circuit, and it slows them down. Ciena is working on a commercial solutions for classified solution at the transport level. That will enable us to encrypt traffic at that level and alleviate the need for bulk encryption devices at network drop-off and endpoint. So it's exciting things coming, particularly with the commercial solutions for classified piece.
Yeah, that all sounds very exciting. It kind of sounds like customers that we have that are on that TDM side, are they looking at this this would be kind of a nice thing to do to go move to a packet network solution-based solution set? They need to. When are they going to do it so they can actually move forward with their mission and support their mission correctly? So really excited to be, part of the Ciena solution set, providing to our customer base. It's a great thing, a lot of advantages. So Jim, I'm going to kind of throw it over to you for closing remarks and kind of the last slide, if you got one.
Sure. I guess what I would like to have folks take away. We've talked a lot about the advantages and the steps that are necessary to go through a successful migration. But Ciena and our teammates like Conversion, we've done this a number of different times, and this is not the first time through. So we've got a certain pedigree behind us, and a fair bit of experience. And that translates into very good success metrics that we've had. Here we're looking at tier 1 and tier 2 carriers as opposed to DoD, but we've done both sides, obviously. And in the first case that we talked about here, we've had customers who've tried to do migrations like this and have had difficulty and had to back off. And we've been able to come in with the process that we've talked about and help them do fairly substantial migrations. The first one was, 23 something odd over OC48 services, a number of different digital cross connects or DACs. And compared to where the customer was originally, we were able to do it probably half again as quickly. In another case, we were able to get efficiencies in terms of costs and both the direct and operating costs of around 40% compared to where a customer was before in terms of operating their network. And in many cases, because of the upfront planning that we're talking about being so important, we're able to set a plan, execute against that plan, and get in and out in the time scale and for the budget that we said we've been able to. So I guess the takeaway I'd like to leave folks with is there's a number of benefits here, which we've talked about, and this team is able to allow you to plan and execute and reap the benefits of those improvements of TDM upgrade by the process that we've talked about, and we're looking forward to helping you do that.
All right, great. And Brian, do you have any kind of closing remarks that you'd like to talk about?
Yeah, I do. We've done probably, over the last 3 years, we've probably done 15 base projects with Ciena. And we find all kinds of different networks, all kinds of different requirements for circuits, from large bandwidth, little T1 tiny circuits. One thing we've been able to do is we've been able to consolidate and support just about any type of network that we've ran into. We've yet to find one that we haven't been able to support. One thing that I go back with is I worked with Ciena people for almost 20 years now, and we have been putting 6,500 equipment into DoD core networks for as long as I can remember, and we're adding more and more edge capability with the packet, the 3926 product. So we're able to do a lot more services, if you will, than we were before. Used to, we just did transport, high bandwidth transport of TDM circuits. Now we're able to support just about anything that the base has. We're finding out that our customers are quite happy when we're done, and they're able to pretty much run the system themselves with very little support needed because of the ease in which the MCP product is able to support them. All in all, a great set of products.
All right, great. Julian, I think we talked about a lot of good stuff here, so I'm going to hand it back to you.
Yeah, that was extremely informative, as always. I want to thank Brian and Jim and Ryan, as always, for joining us today. And I want to encourage everyone to check out the description below. We'll have information for how you can contact C1 Government Solutions and engage Ciena for these kinds of projects. Also, subscribe to the channel because we have a lot more information like this posted before and that we'll be posting in the future. And also a link to the podcast where Ryan and I talk about trends in government technologies every week, and sometimes have the pleasure of being joined by partners such as Jim to talk about such things. So thanks everybody for your time today. Jim and Brian again, and Ryan as always, and we'll see everybody soon.
Sure, Julian. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
Cool. Thank you, guys.
That was excellent.